Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our third AI Roundtable. In this one, we're going to be talking about AI in the workforce. Start out with some brief introductions. I am C.A. Clark, the Vice President of AI at Miles Partnership, and I am also the lead of the North American cohort of a program that we call AI Opener. AI Opener is a global collaborative exploration of kind of the intersection of AI and travel. And so every session we explore a different topic about those two things, everything from kind of search and discovery to how it affects other parts of the DMO business. And this series of roundtables, of public roundtables, is kind of born out of that program, trying to surface some of the important topics that we talk about in AI Opener. Our 2026 program has just concluded. If you are interested in the 2027 program, that was the QR code. We'll see if we can have Andy go back real quick for that QR code if you want that, or if you need it, you can use it. You can ask for it in the chat. So for our third session, we wanted to explore how AI is changing who organizations hire, how they are developing those people, and how organizations need to adapt to really take advantage of that technology. And so to that end, we have invited two excellent speakers to join us today on our panel. We have Mike Coletta from Phocuswright, Senior Manager, Research and Innovation, and Sara Meaney from Coraggio Group. She's the managing partner over there. So we will hear from both of them shortly, and we will have some time for questions at the end. So if you do have some questions, use the Q&A panel, and we will do our best to have the panelists answer all of those questions. So to start out with, I have asked Mike to give us a little bit of an overview of Phocuswright's data in this area. There's some really interesting data from Phocuswright's various research. And so Mike is going to give us a little bit of an overview there. I will hand it over to Mike.
All right, thanks, CA. Thanks for having me here today. I just share my screen with my slides. You should be able to see them. So yeah, what I wanted to share today was a few of the slides from the presentation I just gave recently at Phocuswright Europe in Barcelona in June, because these really just capture just about all my latest thinking on AI. So it was titled The New Math, and it was about how math is changing as AI rewrites the economics of running a travel company. And the thesis is that the winners of the future are going to be the organizations that figure out this new math. So, this presentation was geared toward for-profit companies, suppliers, intermediaries, tech companies, more so than DMOs and nonprofits. I think the principles are important for essentially everyone in the business world to understand at this point, as AI is affecting the workplace for everybody. So I'll translate the lessons for the audience as much as I can, and we'll dig more into it in the discussion afterward. So there's different types of math that I explore in this presentation, starting with the consumer math. And here I mainly want to quickly point out that we measured that it's more than half of US travelers that are now using AI for travel. Well, it's still less than half in Europe. But especially in the US, this confirms a major shift in just who your content has to satisfy and how it reaches them, and the skills that your team needs to get your content out there and get it found in this world. I think that part's pretty obvious. So next is the business math. So getting more into the impact on the workforce here. So this is data from a global survey of travel executives we fielded last fall. So these numbers are surely different and higher now. They still do give directional guidance. We are fielding our new version of our annual survey right now, at the moment, actually. So I will share that link at the end, so you all can take the survey if you want. So first here, what I'm showing is we asked about the main barriers to implementing AI internally. And the top barrier is data security concerns. But the number two barrier is expertise and training, which is very much a people and budget problem, not a tech problem. And then number three is inadequate data quality or tech infrastructure, which is also very important, but it would be good to come back to that in the discussion. The other point I wanted to make on this slide is that it was only 12% of travel organizations that felt fully prepared for AI at the time. And then it was only 6% of organizations that were already using agentic AI at scale at the time, which I think makes a lot of sense. Again, we have this current version of the survey in the field right now. We do need to give it more time to get to statistical significance. But I did pull the preliminary number that we're showing right now for how many have scaled agentic AI, and it's sitting at 10%. So that could certainly change, but it's not showing a huge difference yet, just a little bit higher, as we would expect. But I don't know how much it'll change as we conclude the fielding of the survey, because it is just still so early for agentic adoption. And then the real point between these two slides is there's still so much trust that needs to be built internally around AI, and especially agentic AI. Next is the economic math, and the focus here is on the performance of travel organizations using AI heavily or even natively versus others. And one of the more interesting metrics currently being used to measure AI leverage or performance is revenue per employee. So this chart is cherry-picked a bit to make the point, but this is what it looks like when you directly compare AI-enabled or AI-native organizations side by side with the major travel incumbents by dividing revenue by headcount. So a startup named Pulsia, which helps people use AI to start one-person businesses, is an extreme example of a one-person company itself that has hit 10 million in revenue per employee. I think this is probably even higher now. It's just one guy running it. Anthropic, the makers of Claude, is another extraordinary example at 9 million per employee, even at what they're at now, $47 billion run rate. And there's other AI native companies like Cursor, the AI coding software, that's at 5 million. And then Airbnb, while they've lagged in their consumer-facing AI, they have done a really good job operating leanly, and they've been vocal lately about how they've used AI to improve customer service and booking conversion. And they lead large travel companies at around 1.5 million in revenue per employee. But what's typical is having, say, 1 million or less in revenue per employee. And for this audience, if you're a DMO, I think the better way to think about this is just output or capacity per person instead of revenue. The point is that AI-empowered organizations can get multiples more done per person. And what's enabling these economics is that AI is now good enough at real knowledge work, from coding to research to analysis to customer service, that the unit of measurement of work is shifting from the labor hour to the token, which is the fundamental unit of data for AI, which is typically thought of as a fragment of a word. And token costs are plummeting, declining roughly 10x per year. And as the models get smarter, this means intelligence is getting cheaper. And meanwhile, labor costs are obviously inflationary. For the BLS Employment Cost Index, labor costs are rising at about 3.5% lately. So again, this is the main advantage that organizations fully leveraging AI have, getting work done at a cheaper relative cost. But it's very easy to get something backward here. A cheaper intelligence does not mean that you spend less on it, because according to Jevons paradox, when a new technology makes a resource cheaper, you don't just pocket the savings, you wind up using far more of that resource. So the genesis of this term comes from when steam engines made coal use more efficient, and it turned out that Britain didn't wind up burning less coal, it burned far more. So the winners won't be the ones cutting their labor bill, they'll be the ones using AI to do 10 times the work. And when it comes to cognitive work, the cost of producing an answer, a translation, an analysis, Most companies, DMOs in particular, have never had a shortage of work that's worth doing. It's more a shortage of hours. And that brings us to the time math. Agentic capabilities are moving very fast, but as we've seen, trust is understandably moving much slower. So in the coming years, the winners will also be the ones working on how fast they can close the gap between these two clocks. So harnessing the capabilities of agentic AI while building enough trust inside their own teams and with their stakeholders to actually put those capabilities to work. So again, I believe those who are doing this new math will be the winners of the next era. But what does the final equation look like, and how do you solve it, sticking with the math theme? And I postulate that the final equation, or at least one of the possibilities, would be AI advantage equals demand capture times operating leverage times trust velocity. So travel organizations need to make sure that they're capturing demand in the right channels going forward, while creating major operational efficiencies and continually building trust among both customers and colleagues and stakeholders. And a big part of that is to start budgeting accordingly, because AI made a giant leap in capabilities in late 2025, when most 2026 budgets were already set. But it's critical now to think about proper budgets for next year, including how you empower every employee with the right tools and training to scale operations so that new growth far outpaces new costs. And ideally, certainly how you do that without reducing headcount. And then before I finish up, I want to mention, so as I did mention, we're currently fielding the new survey, and everyone's welcome to take it. Just scan the QR code on this slide with your phone's camera right on the screen, and the link will pop up to go right to it. And I'd like to stress, it's not just going to need 15 minutes of your time. It's designed to really challenge how you think about AI readiness, risk, and attainment of ROI. So I think it's time well spent to take the survey. And then getting to my conclusion, it's really that AI is now extremely capable when used correctly. And when used correctly, it can absolutely create competitive advantage. And I think what that means is that personal productivity and organizational productivity need to start rising in order to stay competitive in the coming years. And I have to say, especially relevant to this discussion, for a long time there, as ChatGPT came on the scene and discussions around AI, have taken their twists and turns, I was worried AI would get so capable that it would start displacing jobs. And I think that fear is palpable. I think especially in the US, I've definitely felt that fear in many others. But now my perspective is that, I've seen and felt how it's possible for people, when they are properly empowered with AI, to accomplish so much more. So I do think the nature of work itself will evolve and could change dramatically in some cases. But for a long time still, conducting business is going to require just as many or more people for most organizations and most industries and most roles, more people being more productive to stay ahead, as opposed to fewer people. And the main thing is really have to get on board and learn the tools, like we all did with computers and internet, email, spreadsheets, smartphones. People do it at different paces, but kind of eventually everyone gets there to continue participating in the workforce and the economy. So bottom line, I implore everyone to do this new math, to work on demand capture, operating leverage, and trust velocity, and to be a fast learner, because right now I do see the math as adding up to lots of opportunity. So thanks for that, and back to you, CA.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. Some really good points in there that we want to explore a little bit more. So let's dive into some questions for our panelists. And this is a great time, if you have some questions that you would like to hear answers to, put them in the Q&A. So we'll start out with a question for Mike. In your intro slides, you were talking about new math and AI labor costs versus the human labor costs. What do you think that math might need to look like for a DMO with a fixed budget versus a company that can sort of more freely re-architect its processes? Are there like key considerations that DMOs should be including in their budget planning for next year? You talked a little bit about tokens and costs of tokens going down, but there's also sort of a challenge there where the more you use the tools, the usage of tokens goes up really, really fast. So can you talk a little bit about what you think that might be for a DMO's budget versus a more commercial entity?
Yeah, it's certainly different for DMOs. Maybe not that different because most companies have tight budgets, have tight bandwidth, trying to do too much with too few people. I think that's a truism for most organizations, perhaps outside the most profitable ones. For-profit companies can take the productivity gain from AI and reinvest into growth and revenue, while a DMO with a fixed budget can't like monetize the gains the same way. But as I touched on, the new math for DMOs isn't about fewer people, lower costs. It's more of same team, dramatically more output, which should show up as new capacity for more content, more destination coverage, faster research, better visitor service, et cetera, rather than profit. So I guess I'd reiterate the point. It's important to budget properly for 2027, whatever that means for each organization, but properly funding tools, licenses, and training for everyone in the organization. And, on a fixed budget, on a tight budget, that could mean finding the right trade-offs, perhaps scaling back some other initiatives, at least for now, in order to make this investment, which really, really, we all believe here, I think, will pay big dividends in the future. To put some numbers on it, if we're starting small, if we take a team of maybe 15 people, everyone's on a $25 a month plan, that's $4,500 a year. Training and consultants, I guess, and whatever help you need could bring that up, but you have to be resourceful, but maybe just be thinking about, one fewer campaign, one deferred website refresh, a little bit less conference presence, et cetera.
Yeah, I think those are great numbers. And that's one of the things, like when we think about those, team accounts, there's kind of a baseline where you can say, like, these are the number of people that you have in your organization, and this is what it costs per month to use, ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot or whatever it is that you're going to use. Most of those, if not all of those platforms will have different seat tiers, right? They'll have like a basic one and kind of a more advanced one. And so one of the kind of watch outs for organizations, I think, is thinking about trying to anticipate how many people will need to be wound up to that higher seat allocation of tokens, because ideally there's not a situation where you're going to run for an entire year and have everyone on that base subscription. So while the base cost can be relatively low, there is a little bit of extra budget that I think has to be put into that. But to your point, Mike, in a lot of these cases, there's not, it's a relatively small amount of money compared to a campaign or, other kinds of investments that DMOs make.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's specifically important to understand the models and their capabilities. Because, right, on the $25 license, if you're using Claude and you use the Fable model, well, that's not even available in the $25 license.
That's a good point.
You have to pay extra for that. If you use Opus, you might burn through your usage, whether it's the 5-hour usage or the weekly usage limit quickly. So, it comes down to understanding Haiku versus Sonnet versus Opus if you're in Claude, or Sol, Terra, and Luna if you're in GPT.
Right.
We can get into open source, and that's a little bit outside, I think, most organizations' scope for now, but there are ways to bring that token cost down.
Yeah, and all of that is still being sort of subsidized by the labs now, and so there's this like current versus future cost, and there's tons of different questions about what that right now for most organizations, especially if they're not massively sized organizations, the investment on the tool itself is relatively low. And you mentioned it a little bit, sort of the education or the support part of it, and that's also a really important part, right? It's not enough to just give people the tool and then kind of let them go. You also have to think about how you're going to support those people.
Yeah, depends on capabilities currently in your organization and what you need to bring in there to supplement.
Yeah, yeah, very good point. So to that end, let's hear from Sara. You've seen some organizations that approach AI as a software or as an IT problem, and others maybe approach it as a leadership or a change question. What do you think is different about how those two things play out?
I think it's a great question. Yeah, we definitely, I think the gut reaction that most leaders have is that technology is technology and software is software, and therefore we have to start with an IT perspective. And while I think that's true, it's true, and the distinction is really that an IT-led approach to this actually results in the installation of a tool and the connection of data. Those are very important steps in the usage or consideration of AI in an organization. But a leadership or operational-led viewpoint is actually going to result in the opportunity to redesign work and what work gets done. So, I mean, put in a punchline, it really is. And not to be diminutive of IT. IT makes AI possible and safe within the organization, but a leadership-driven approach actually makes it useful across the organization and can help enable context for each role. So I think that's an important and way to think about it. You know, our partners in IT are a necessary part of the consideration, and you know, will bring valid expertise to the decision making of what platforms might get chosen, or how they are integrated, or how they work within the environment. But what IT can't solve for, and what it's not fair to expect our IT colleagues to figure out, is how is AI relevant to my role or to your role? Because only you or the expertise within that particular department or within that particular, you know, position can determine how AI could augment or supplement the work that you do, or change how your work evolves.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the kind of the most, you know, Mike talked a lot about opportunity, and I believe there is a tremendous amount of opportunity here, but that opportunity has to do with some of it is about productivity, but the real opportunity is in sort of redefining the value that organizations provide to their stakeholders and to, you know, to visitors, right, whoever their customers are. And that isn't an IT function. It's not a software thing.
Right.
So like connecting this to that budget conversation, it's tempting to make this a line item in an IT budget, and go like, you know, how much is the software, and it's this amount of money. But it kind of misses what the real opportunity is, and what kind of needs to change in the organization to get that value.
If anything, it's a strategy. It's an organizational strategy question. And I don't mean a strategic planning question. I mean what are we anticipating and expecting the organization to be able to make possible in the next 3 to 5 years, for example? And how does AI play a role in being a tool or a set of tools that help us achieve those organizational, operational, and value creation roles? I mean, it's every single department, if given the right training and context, is completely capable of redefining the volume of work they do. So not just a productivity question, but what work they do, and what value can be created, and what could be delivered in the future, as compared to not just resource constraints as defined by the hour or the person hour, as Mike was kind of referring to, but instead, how do we create new ways of value delivery for the people we serve? So,
yeah, I think that's also,
you know, how you leverage it through management of people, how you leverage it through communication, how you leverage it through HR, right? And all of the above. There are ways in which all roles within an organization, barring anything that might not have access to the tool at all times, right? It could be frontline worker, but even then, I think we're just steps away from even that being much more relevant. I think DMOs have a huge opportunity, and we often see the first movement kind of on the marketing and external facing side, right? Which is, chatbots and communication tools and outbound campaign development and speed to market and volume, and all of that is a great example. But we can't relegate it to IT and marketing, because the reason it's effective in marketing is the same reason it can be effective and relevant in every other role.
Yeah, I think great.
I think there's a real challenge in what you were highlighting there in terms of sort of plotting a strategic way forward.
Yeah.
There's a lot of unknowns, right? And so we can sort of try to imagine a future state, but without knowing how the technology can change the way that we deliver value, right? We know that there's an enormous opportunity there, but it's really hard to sort of write that down. And that's a lot of that, the challenge of kind of plotting what the future looks like is maybe more about adapting an organization, right, than it is about writing down exactly what you're going to deliver in 6 months or 12 months or 18 months.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's a great point that one path or one way of thinking about it is just making everything you do more efficient and doing more of it. And then the other path is freeing you up to do much more creative things and new things.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, things that you wouldn't even have necessarily considered. Yeah.
It positions AI not as a displacement of human talent, but instead a supplement to unleash available human talent that is bogged down by activities that could be offloaded. So I think that it's an organizational enablement opportunity, despite hesitation and uncertainty that people have, unless or until they have an opportunity to really work with it and see what's possible.
Yes, excellent points.
Thanks.
All right, let's go back to Mike. One of your charts talked about data quality as a key barrier to AI readiness. That's obviously going to be different for DMOs than it is for some of the other kind of commercial entities. Where do you think travel organizations are specifically falling short on that front, and which parts of that are kind of most relevant to the DMO?
Yeah, that was the chart about barriers, the first chart about barriers to AI implementation. Yeah, I mean, to me, it was a little worrisome to see that more people, more organizations weren't kind of naming data quality as a top barrier. It means it's either truly solved, but more likely, it's just not having the realization yet that like how important it is. Because when you connect AI to messy data, the tool can only be as good as the data is. So I think the three of us have probably been repeating that a lot, right? And you just can never say it too many times. It's one of the harder parts, to get your data in order. And it's hard to generalize because organizations are all so different in how they operate, but it also is extremely common to have important data scattered through spreadsheets, living in email, random files, databases. And this part is daunting. It takes a lot of time and effort to go through it and make it readable and put it in, a centralized place and make it easy for AI to understand. It is typically siloed across systems that don't talk to each other, so it's hard to get AI to see the full picture. And governance is a big topic. That means, even when the data is readable and connected, do you have duplicates? Do you have outdated information? Do you have contradictory information that can confuse AI? Those are all common issues. So, DMOs specifically sit on such rich destination data, but as far as I know, it is often trapped in older content management systems, PDFs, etc. And for back to that very first slide I showed on the consumer data, this is where we are. If a traveler asks ChatGPT or Gemini, what should I do in so-and-so destination this weekend? As more than half of travelers in the US are doing in those platforms, or just even using Google's AI mode, if your data is not clean, structured, accessible, the AI is going to pull from third parties and OTAs, or it'll make something up, and you lose control of the story. So, all I can really say is you have to try to figure out how to do the work to be AI ready through clean data. It's the modern equivalent of having a good website in early 2000s. And there are plenty of resources out there that can help. I know you both know of some good ones, but you do have to figure out how to do that dirty work.
I think there's, in there kind of two different, an internally facing and an externally facing problem, and they're related, obviously. I think one of the things that is good about the sort of data quality and access problem is that AI is a technology that can really help us move that data around and translate it into other places. And so I think this is less of a problem of like exactly what sort of format or how things are being stored, and more of a problem of really just being able to describe what data do you have and how does it relate. Those silos aren't so much about the like whether it's stored in this kind of a way or this place, and more about how that data is completely disconnected from other data that you have. And so in one way, it's actually a little bit easier because it's enabled by AI from like a technical perspective, but it's also much harder because it's sort of rolling up a level to try to define like, how does this stuff even fit together to begin with, right? Before we even worry about where it's stored.
And yet, isn't that a human question anyway? So without and I don't mean to joke or oversimplify, but like Mike, what you described is the age-old question of, we have so much data, we just don't even know what it's telling us or where it is or all of those things. So in order to become AI ready, we have to organize the data that we already have and can't use all the way because we haven't organized our data for us to use it all the way. So while one person could see it as being a barrier, or we're not ready to use AI because our data is a mess, well, your data is a mess and you're paying for it, right? So where should our time be spent to make the most of the data that we have, whether it's humans analyzing it, which by the way, they should be anyway, even if AI is also analyzing it. And when are we going to make time to do that, to clean up our mess, right? In order to see it clearly. It's sort of like the comment I make to my teenagers. It's like, how can you even see where the clothes are that you want to wear when all of it is all over the floor? Well, you have to be able to see and look for what you're looking for in order to organize it in the first place. I just think it's a human problem that I caution that we blame AI for the reason why we don't clean up our data. We should clean up our data because it needs to be cleaned up in order for us to glean insight from it. We're already spending a lot of money on data.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Not poor teenagers get picked on.
I haven't heard that one before. That's a really good example.
Another good analogy is changing the wheels.
Cool analogies.
Another good one is changing the wheels on the car while you're driving it. Right? I mean, it's so busy, and this stuff takes a lot of time to learn, how it even works, much less apply it. So and you're not alone.
That is so true now, right? Like, it feels like that's just across all of the activities at this point.
Yeah. Another interesting perspective, because if you follow me, I'm kind of, AI and startups and tech mostly. And it's just interesting to me to ponder how AI native startups who can build this kind of all this infrastructure, company infrastructure from scratch, seem to have such an advantage versus companies that have been operating a certain way for a long time. Yet in travel, distribution's king. And it's so hard for any young company to sort of establish and get distribution in travel. So, I couldn't tell you which way, who's going to have advantage in a year, 2 years, 5 years, but it's just super interesting to ponder and watch.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts for sure. Okay, Sarah, you have talked about in the past the need for organizations to move from job title thinking to capabilities-based roles. What do you think is a more traditional hiring habit that you still see leadership fall back on, even though it is outdated?
I think all of us have a tendency to do things that we think are working or have worked for us in the past. And yet that's also kind of the definition of insanity. If we would like to see a different outcome or like to move our organization or a position or a specific category of impact to a new outcome, we should not be doing it the exact same way we've always been doing it. So I think, the world we work in and the society we live in understands job titles because they are descriptive or they're universally understood to describe a category of work or a category of expertise, right? But when we don't take into consideration the changes in capabilities we want to see within a role in the future, we're kind of missing an opportunity to reframe who we hire and what we expect of them. So really what we should be doing is changing the question we're asking of ourselves when we have an opportunity to either post for a position or reframe a job description. It's more about what are the capabilities that are going to help us create the outcomes we need next, we need now or in the future, versus what was it that made us successful in the past? Because if we look at it in the latter way, we're going to say, let's hire somebody just like Susie. Susie left. She's got something else going on. Susie did the marketing director job and she was pretty good at it. Let's find another Susie based on what Susie did. And I don't mean to suggest that that's always how we frame it, but when we're in hiring mode and we need to replace a necessary role, we often go, all right, find the job description, get it posted, make sure you put it in the right places. And in reality, we're in a completely new work environment, even within the same job title, right? Where it isn't just productivity shifts or technology awareness that we're hiring for. We need to be asking and looking for demonstration of AI comfort, AI experimentation, and AI success and failure. We should be asking candidates and our existing internal teams questions that help us understand not are you using AI or what AI platform are you using, but rather how have you been using it? What have you unlocked? What did you learn? What did you put in place that changed how either you use your time or the way you deliver work? That's a completely different conversation than, are you comfortable with AI? Or, but that also requires the hiring manager or the HR recruiter to understand how to ask those questions in the context of the roles as we understand them. So it's a knowledge and confidence gain that everybody kind of has to be moving along the continuum on together. So if it's a priority that you expect or want to be able to expect people in the future to leverage AI strategically in their role and perhaps even help others leverage it, then you really need to design it from the inside out.
Well, and I think you have to be very deliberate about it, which is a challenge to do. And part of what you talked about there is sort of asking questions about how people think about things, which sometimes is hard to do in a hiring process. This is actually one of the areas that I kind of see, from having spent the last, now kind of 3 years talking to organizations, DMOs about different topics that are AI and travel related. This is one of the areas that is really kind of missing from that, feels like it's lagging behind, who are we hiring? How are we changing how we do that process? Because that has a multi-year impact.
Yeah.
Right. And I know that there are very different ways that we work. And I know from following you, Mike, on LinkedIn, that there are lots of different ways that you are working now than the way that you were working just maybe 18 months ago. And I feel like that really hasn't kind of caught up into the way that we hire or interview people in organizations.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to add, oh, I'm sorry, Mike, go for it.
Well, I was going to say for sure, but also my computer is slowing down. Can you still hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. As long as you can hear me.
Yes, we can. What I was going to add a comment on is I would caution all of us, and I don't mean just the three of us and the folks on this meeting, caution us from falling into the same trap as people before us have often fallen into, which is, well, that generation, they're much more X savvy, or, my nephew with the new iPhone camera can do this video better than whatever. And in reality, the question of AI fluency really has nothing to do with age, in my experience and in our experience. It actually has more to do with seeking a level of curiosity and flexibility in the way we make inquiries into the world, right? How we inquire into available data sets has everything to do with how we change the way or the types of questions we ask of it, right? And that's a skill. Some of it can be trained, but there is some innate skill that is unique to individuals and not unique to being technology native or social native or digital native. What we have seen a lot is actually the people who become most comfortable and effective in AI use. It is a completely different skill. It's a curiosity and a mental flexibility that's really hard to get at, but I believe that there are ways to get at questions that help figure that out about a person. So
yeah, they're just much more sort of complex, I think, in some ways.
Yeah.
All right, Mike, I know you need to jump off in a little bit. There are some questions, so I'm going to dive right into the audience questions here, and we'll try to answer a couple of these. So the first question says, is it necessary to subscribe to multiple platforms, or will there be competition to be the go-to platform for different industries, i.e. travel? So do either of you have a take on that?
Yeah, I do have a hard stop in a few minutes, so happy to jump in. Great question about multiple platforms. Because it's so easy to use ChatGPT or Codex, ChatGPT's Codex or Claude and Cowork, and have it learn a lot about you, and customize its answers and understand context. And it is by far the easiest route, I would say, and most economical, and you get a lot of the best intelligence, the frontier or close to frontier intelligence. Long term, I don't see it as probably being the best option. I mean, it could be, I guess, depending on your budget and sophistication and how much you care, I guess, what kind of data you're working with, and whether a lot of that or all of it is going to the tech giants. I think at some point in the next, could just be a year or two, it will become more common and a lot easier to work with open source solutions that are multi-model. Even Perplexity is a good example of this, and even Microsoft is actually moving in this direction with Copilot. And it's just not as good an experience for now as the frontier tools. But I see that as being, a great option and a viable option at some point. It's not really a great option for now, but like the perfect solution would sort of understand all your context and then be efficient by selecting models or helping you select the right models for the right work. And that could even be customized models to some degree that you even train on your own data. Yeah, I do think that's where things should go. You should be using different models for different tasks that, where you're harnessing their capabilities as much as possible.
Okay.
While I am not an AI researcher or AI futurist, the commentary I would share here from the viewpoint of organizational effectiveness and operating decision making, The ideal scenario is that by really intentionally inquiring about the opportunity for use, the various use cases and value creation cases within your organization, ideally you're going to narrow to the necessary few that get most of that work done in order to manage costs, manage risk, and manage training in an efficient and effective way without limiting the possibility of one platform being better for a specific task. This isn't about, one ring to rule them all, but rather it's, identifying the right ones to achieve the things that you absolutely have to have and putting in place policies that allow and enable either experimentation or review or controls to adapt over time as the technology adapts and your needs change. So having it be like anything goes and everybody can, just go experiment and figure it out isn't manageable over the long haul, even if it is the right way forward in an experimentation phase. So you want to make it so it's less overwhelming and manageable within the context of an enterprise in order to achieve the other goals of the business. So that would be my take from how do you make a choice when there's so many choices and you don't know where to begin? You ask an expert to help you figure out the right platforms and be flexible enough to make the change if you need to down the road.
I do have to jump in. Just one other point. It was a little bit more to the previous question. About, I guess when you're hiring, what are kind of good questions to ask and good skills to try to verify. I think one of the most important things is to focus on the process by which AI output is verified. It's one of the hardest things to properly define the goals or the criteria for success. It's kind of easier in something like coding where the code works or not, even though it could be good code or bad code. But you can say, yes, it works or no, it doesn't work. In more qualitative output, it can be harder, but you need some kind of way to say it's the AI is succeeding or not, whether that's verified by a human or you can even have another AI doing it. That's called adversarial technique, where you have different AIs critiquing each other and all having the source of truth, and if you can have them agree, you can have more confidence in the answer. So yeah, I'm so sorry I can't say. There's some other good questions. I have to run right now. So thank you so much for having me,
Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks. Bye.
Appreciate your input.
Of course. Bye.
All right, a couple of other good questions here. It's got several things coming in, which is fantastic. Appreciate that from the audience. So this one says, how can organizations effectively engage staff members who are hesitant to adopt AI during an internal implementation process, particularly when their concerns include environmental impact and sustainability implications of increasing AI use? I know that is a thing that you have dealt with, Sara. So this is an excellent question for you to respond to.
Well, and I mean, I would love for us to debate on this one too, or at least dialogue on it. Yeah, it comes up a lot. And I mean, it's a reasonable and a credible point of dialogue within an organization. I mean, one, if you know that that is a limitation within your organization, you're already ahead of the game, right? You understand that there is either a philosophical or a knowledge or an information opportunity to address that hesitation. There's also the question of what is the expectation that the organization has for AI use by all employees? It's an important question, right? And there's the difference between having a policy, access, availability, and training, and having a mandate. And both could be true. Both could be true, but it's an important decision that has to be made, right? It isn't all that different from the idea that organizations offer manager bootcamp training, and it's not required, but it's recommended. What is the mechanism by which an organization enforces it, reinforces it, or rewards it? Often the reward and reinforcement cycle within the culture of an organization is going to dictate, or at least drive, how hesitant members may engage over time by building trust with other employees who are using it successfully. Then there's also simply the availability of information that may either help clarify what their concerns actually mean or dispel perhaps inaccurate assumptions, not to dismiss the concern that environmental or sustainability concerns are not valid. But again, with a teenager comparison, I like to ask my kids, if you're concerned about the use of AI and the consumption of water, how many YouTube videos have you streamed in the last week? So when we think about the role that technology and data and access plays in consumption of limited resources, we probably should be looking at the entirety of that idea and not at only the use of AI within work. So I don't know, point, counterpoint, CA, what would you add to that?
Two things. I mean, there's in any process, this is actually the sort of the core part of change management, right? Is there in any kind of process, there should be an expectation that people are at different levels, and no matter what thing we're talking about, whether we're talking about changing which email platform you use, or or any change at all, there is always a percentage of those people that are sort of resistant to those changes.
Mhm.
And that's organizationally, that there's a whole process defined in change management that says this is how we identify those people, this is how we communicate, this is how we set boundaries in those changes. I think part of the challenge with that is when we're talking about AI, that change is not one, right? It's just this rolling change that keeps happening, and that makes it a lot more complex. But there's that sort of underlying, thinking about how we communicate to people, what the fears are, right? What the objections are, and how we meet those objections where they are.
Mhm.
And and accept those objections is really all part of kind of how change management and how organizational effectiveness works. This is all over all of the different parts of how an organization functions. So that part, I think, is to be expected, that there is some resistance, whatever that resistance is, and it's for lots of different reasons. In some cases, the organizations that I work with, the people who are most resistant turn out to be kind of the most effective. Not always, but sometimes those are some of your best people, are the ones that are feel like they're resistant in the beginning. And then the environmental one, which comes up all the time, I totally get that. I'm not at all trying to dismiss that, and particularly when Mike was talking about Javon's paradox, and that was about coal, right? And so the usage of coal actually went way up, even though the steam engine was a much more efficient use of that. That is sort of what we're talking about here, is that kind of paradox of like the cheaper things mean that we use it more. But to your point, this really has to be in the context of other things, right? We don't exist in a world where there's either AI and nothing. There's all of these other things that we do all the time that are part of that picture.
Right.
And so that's the kind of the tricky bit, is that if you want to get into that part of the conversation, you really have to look broader than just like just segmenting out and saying like, this is what AI usage looks like.
Mhm.
So unfortunately, not an easy answer, right? And it comes up in most organizations that there's concern about that. It takes a really sort of careful way to try to meet what those questions are, and and provide answers to them.
Right. And listen and acknowledge and validate all of that. That has everything to do with enabling change and building trust and opportunity to work through barriers, whether they are perceived or real. All of that is true. Yeah.
All right, two more questions. This one, I think we have circled around a little bit, but I want to address all the questions that we can. So this says, what recommendations do we have on how to enable organizations to decide when to use AI and when not? Often AI is seen as the solution to every problem. And I totally agree with that observation, right? There is a period, I feel like, in organizations where it just goes, well, AI can solve that. And that isn't, obviously is not always the case. Do you have a take on how organizations can decide?
Well, yes. I mean, I think the idea is it begins with inquiring into the organization's functions and goals and intentions of how it creates value and how it operates in the world. So the inquiry has to begin from within specific roles and what the expectations of outputs, not just volume, might be. In a DMO context, this question comes up a lot, which is, we are capacity constrained, we're a small team, we have limited budget, we're always being asked to do more with less. And this is real. This is real, whether you're a 10 million plus DMO or a 500,000 or less DMO, the situation still holds, just at different scale. Ultimately, you have to decide what you as an organization should be agreeing to get done or what you could possibly get done. The answer could be you could get certain things more or differently done, leveraging AI. But ultimately, the question is that what you exist to do? Is your mission aligned with the idea that AI can solve this? I think it is relevant to imagine that if humans should be doing it, it's worthy of exploring what ways AI could be supplementing or augmenting the need for that work, activity, or output. And sometimes the answer is maybe it's not worth it, or maybe it hasn't fundamentally changed what needed to get done, or perhaps the value is in doing it and the human touch of it, right? There are several things that you cannot and should not fully augment. That has everything to do with relationships, which are the foundation of trust. And DMOs exist. They're foundational based on relationships, the partnerships, the organizations they represent, the experiences that are person to person and in place, actual physical in real life. There are plenty of categories in which the answer is not AI can do it, and should always, or at least for the time being, should remain the realm of human connection, knowledge, and trust. So I don't agree that AI can do it is the answer to everything, but I understand, the way the question was answered or it was asked is meant to be provocative. In reality, AI could do a whole bunch of stuff. That doesn't mean you want it to.
Well, and I think there's like this sort of curve of, right, like in a lot of cases there'll be this sort of like oh, I don't think this thing really works at all, and then you kind of have as you begin to sort of understand the edges of it, right, then there'll be this like bounce back in some cases where the organization goes, oh, this can solve everything, and then you sort of have to tip over and come back to that kind of level area of like, oh, okay, these are the kinds of things that we can do and not do.
Well,
okay, lastly, there
LOL,
is
I was just going to say, OMG, LOL. That's how social media swung
exactly.
wildly to an overuse and just junk scenario for organizational use, and perhaps back to a slightly more moderate category of use that makes the most sense. I think that's part of the curve that you're talking about, right? There's the adoption, control, access, limited access, control the access. Everybody's got access and, oh, can't put the genie back in the bottle. This is that too, but that's what experimentation needs to determine, is what are the wrinkly edges of what makes the most sense within the organization, or frankly, within a category of the industry.
Yep. Last question. This is a longer one, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it is an excellent question that talks a little bit about feeling like the person is cheating, and so that's really the part that I wanted to acknowledge. The rest of the comment actually does say that this person is one person on a small team, and that AI has really been a game changer for them, but they still feel like they're cheating a little bit. And I think this comes up a lot, so that's why I wanted to address this one, is this sort of feeling like this is cheating. I think there's an element to that. Like, I think you could use this tool to cheat. It's just really a question of how you decide to use that tool. And I suspect that accountants in the 80s or whatever it was when the first spreadsheet was introduced probably felt like they were cheating as well.
I was going to use abacus and calculator and long division as my example, but the same thing holds true, right? An advancement that is early may feel like a shortcut, or a leapfrog that diminishes somehow what the longer work has been historically. But somewhere in the middle here is, what is the authentic work product that you, the individual, or you, the organization, has created? And how are you characterizing it? Has everything to do with whether it's cheating in your own mind or producing using available technology. And there's a balance somewhere in the middle. But I got rid of my Abacus not long ago because I found a calculator on my phone is more accurate.
All right, that does it for our time today. Thank you all for sticking with us, and look forward to seeing you on our next AI Roundtable for Destinations.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks to Mike. We will see you next time.
Bye.